Throughout sports, there's been many players whose dominance is so unmatched that rules had to be put in place for better competition. For baseball in the late 60s, that dominance stemmed from Bob Gibson. After years of dominance, he was so untouchable in the year 1968 that it led Major League Baseball to make drastic changes that changed the game for years to come. So let's look back at that year and Bob Gibson's dominance.
Totally sports-esque. Major League.
The Cardinals came into the 1968 season as the defending champions. On offense, they were led by their first baseman Orlando Cepeda, who had just won the MVP, while their catcher, Tim Carver, finished second in MVP voting. And they fielded an outfield of all-stars, with Curt Flood, who was coming off another Gold Glove year, making 0 errors in 1966 and 67, Lou Brock in left, who had led the league in stolen bases the past 2 years, and Roger Maris in right, who was at the later stages of his career, but still effective. And just as important was the rotation that compiled an average ERA of 3.03 in 1967. And while Gibson was the headliner of the rotation, he wasn't the best in 1967, as that distinction belonged to Dick Hughes, throwing the most innings while compiling a 2.67 ERA and 161 strikeouts. And part of the reason Gibson wasn't the number one in 1967 was injury. Gibson was hit by a Roberto Clemente line drive on his right leg on July 15th. Gibson was unaware that he fractured his leg and faced 3 more batters before snapping his right fibula. He would return in September as the Cardinals cruised to the pennant, and he went on to have one of the greatest World Series performances of all time, pitching 3 complete game victories with 26 strikeouts and just 3 earned runs to earn MVP honors. Gibson had the prestige, the honors, and the motivation to put up a career year in 1968, and as you may guess, he was well on his way. And perhaps a bigger reason for this expected success wasn't just Gibson, but the league as a whole. The mid-60s were a time of low offense and dominant pitching reminiscent of the times we're in now. 1968 would bring the lowest league batting average since 1888, which went a long way in Carl Yastrzemski winning the batting title with just a .301 average. This year also brought the lowest OPS since 1915, the least amount of average runs since 1917, and the highest amount of average strikeouts ever recorded to that point. Of course, the 5.99 average strikeouts per game looks like nothing to the present day. In a time of record-setting poor offense and Bob Gibson reaching the peak of his career, the stars were aligning for a year of dominance never seen before or after. Gibson came into 1968 in his 10th season at the age of 32, far removed from his days on the Harlem Globetrotters. His first start came on opening day against the Atlanta Braves on April 10th, and this game took place a day after originally scheduled due to the funeral of Martin Luther King Jr. Troops were patrolled outside of Tiger Stadium, Memorial Stadium in Baltimore, and DC Stadium due to riots taking place in the days prior, but things were more calm in St. Louis as Gibson took the mound for the first time that year. And he had a weird first game, in the fact that he recorded 0 strikeouts, something he hadn't done since May 14th in 1967 against the Mets, where he gave up 7 hits and 3 runs, while not lasting 4 innings. But in his 1968 opener, he had no strikeouts, pitched 7 innings, giving up just 3 hits and 0 earned runs for a no decision. Not really dominant, but very effective. He would go on to pitch 3 more games that month, including another against the Braves, and this ended up being his worst month of the year, which is saying a lot, considering he finished the month with a 1.97 ERA on 32 innings. And while the mid to late 60s have similarities to today's poor offensive performance, one thing different in this time can be seen in Gibson's first 2 starts in May. He pitched 12 innings on the first against the Astros, and 11 innings against the Mets 5 days later, something I guarantee you won't see a pitcher do in the coming year. And in those 2 games, he only gave up 1 earned run while striking out 18. But to end the month, he recorded 4 straight losses to finish the month with a 1.27 ERA and a 2.14 FIP, which really speaks to the league-wide issue with offense that Gibson dealt with on his own team. Gibson only gave up more than 2 earned runs once in these 4 starts, but got a total of 3 runs in support. Despite having the likes of Curt Flood, Lou Brock, and Orlando Cepeda, the offensive problem was universal for teams. And to show how good Gibson and others had to be, the Cardinals scored 583 runs that year, and in 2023, the Oakland A's scored more. So despite the poor offense, pitchers had pressure with every pitch. And after that 4-game stretch of losses and an okay start by his standards against the Mets to start June, Gibson went on one of the greatest stretches a pitcher's ever had. To end the month of June, Gibson threw 5 straight complete game shutouts with an average of 7 strikeouts per game, lowering his season ERA from 1.66 to 1.14, and reaching the halfway point of the season, he somehow kept getting better. In his first 2 starts of July, he threw 2 straight complete games in LA and San Francisco, giving up just 1 run. That 1 run came on a wild pitch he threw in the 3rd inning, ending a 49-inning scoreless streak. And had he not given up that wild pitch, he would have had a scoreless inning streak of 71, 12 more than the record set by Oral Hershiser in 1988. And for even further proof that 1968 was the year of the pitcher, the record Hershiser broke was set by Don Drysdale in 1968 at 58.2 scoreless innings. Drysdale would start the All-Star game in part due to Gibson pitching just 3 days prior, and the year can be summarized in the game as the National League ended up winning 1-0. The only run was scored in the first on a double play, meaning no one recorded an RBI in this game, the only All-Star game where this happened, and in the second half, his dominance continued. To end the month of July, his ERA was at the lowest it would ever get at .96. Throughout June and July, Gibson threw a complete game in every game he started, winning every single one of them to bring his record to 15-5, allowing just 6 earned runs in this time, finishing just these 2 months with a .5 ERA in 108 innings. His stretch of 13 straight complete games came to an end on his first start in August against the Cubs. In that game, he pitched 11 innings, giving up 4 earned runs, but the Cardinals would end up losing that game in 13 innings. And obviously, Gibson couldn't go the full 13, and those 4 earned runs were the most he gave up all year to that point, putting his ERA back over 1. But after this, he went right back to complete dominance, pitching 6 straight complete games with 3 of these being shutouts, including a 10-inning shutout against the Reds to start September, to bring his ERA back under 1 at .99. But in his final 5 starts, he wasn't quite at the insane level he was in June and July, which is again saying a lot considering he finished September with 5 complete games with a 1.56 ERA, 53 strikeouts, and 52 innings. And that brought his final stats to one of the best stat lines ever. In the year of 1968, Bob Gibson threw 304.2 innings, pitching 34 games, with 28 of these being complete games, and 13 of those being complete game shutouts. He finished top in the league in ERA+, FIP, WHIP, WAR, hits per 9, and strikeouts, but the most memorable stat that he led the league in was ERA. He had an insane ERA of 1.12, the second lowest in MLB history behind Mordecai Brown's 1.04 in 1912. Another notable stat is that he lost 9 games, and that goes back to his own team's lack of offense that mirrored the league. To have a 1.12 ERA and still lose 9 games, one would have to assume that pitcher played on a terrible team. But Gibson played on the best team in the National League, who finished 6th in runs scored per game. And those stats for Gibson easily gave him the Cy Young, and though rather close, Gibson also won the MVP over Pete Rose, being the last NL pitcher to do so until Clayton Kershaw in 2014. And if you want a quick overview of why 1968 was the year of the pitcher, in both leagues, the MVP was a pitcher, as Denny McLain beat out his teammate Bill Freehan to win the award after posting a 1.96 ERA in 41 games, while winning 31 of these games in a time where wins had more value. And fittingly, these two were set to face off in Game 1 of the World Series, as the Tigers and Cardinals played in one of the greatest World Series ever. And in the year of the pitcher, Gibson proved why he was the best pitcher in Game 1, throwing a complete game shutout and striking out a World Series record 17, as the Cardinals won 4-0. The two would then face again in Game 4, and Gibson further proved himself with another complete game victory, giving up just 1 run on a Jim Northrup home run, as the Cardinals took a commanding 3-1 lead, seemingly ending the series. But the Tigers responded in Game 5 with a come-from-behind win, and in Game 6, Denny McLain would pitch on short rest, and it paid off when he threw a complete game with plenty of run support to set up a Game 7 with Bob Gibson on the mound. And instead of McLain this time, he would go up against Mickey Lolich on short rest, who had already won 2 games in the series in Game 2 and 5. These two would both put up zeros through the first 6 innings, but things would change in the 7th. Gibson got 2 outs, gave up singles to Norm Cash and Willie Horton. Then Jim Northrup came to bat, and on the very first pitch, he lined a ball to center fielder Curt Flood. Flood, who was one of the best center fielders in the game and had just received his 6th Gold Glove, made the mistake of starting in on the ball, then having to reverse direction. The ball went well over Flood's head, and Northrup would end up on third, while Cash and Horton would score to break the game open. Northrup would score before the end of the inning, after a Bill Freehan double that would be more than enough for Mickey Lolich, who would only give up 1 run as he completed his 3rd complete game victory of the series, as the Tigers won the World Series to officially put an end to the year of the pitcher. The 1969 MLB offseason would be one of the most important in history, and it's not for any trades or signings, but rather the massive rule changes and additions, as the MLBPA and the owners completed the first collective bargaining agreement in MLB history. And a new well-known league logo was added, and teams were added to the boycott that nearly took place in spring training. As a result of the Athletics moving to Oakland, Kansas City gained the Royals, San Diego gained the Padres, Montreal gained the first ever team outside of the US with the Expos, and Seattle gained the Pilots, a team that lasted for just 1 season, and one you can learn more about in the video I made about them. Another big change came in the playoff format. As a result of the new teams joining the league, the playoff expanded to 4 teams. The leagues were now split in two divisions, with the NLCS and ALCS getting its start. The top two teams would make the World Series in 1969 anyway, but this went a long way to the current state that allows 3 times as many teams to make the playoffs. And the biggest change within the game itself was an aim to fix the offensive problem. The first is the strike zone shrunk to the top of the knees to the batter's armpits. And funny enough, part of what led to the dominance of pitchers was Major League Baseball widening the strike zone after 1961 when Roger Maris broke the single-season home run record. So now, they were trying to find a balance of sorts. And another way they aimed to find that balance was lowering the pitcher's mound from 15 inches to 10 inches. So now Bob Gibson was only 7 feet tall when he took the mound. And did these changes work? Well, they did help a little. Basically every offensive stat rose in the league, from average number of hits, runs, batting average, OPS, and lower strikeout rates. They weren't drastic differences like the number of stolen bases in 2023 compared to 2022, but they rose some. And the ERA rose over 0.6 points compared to the lowest ERA at 2.98 since 1918, and hasn't dipped below 3 ever since that year. And how did it affect the best pitchers of 1968? Well, for the MVPs, not much. Denny McLain's ERA rose by almost a full point, but then again, he still put up an incredible year, pitching 9 complete game shutouts in 325 innings, while allowing the fewest hits in the league as he won another Cy Young. As for Bob Gibson, his ERA did rise over an entire point. Then again, it was 2.18. He ended up throwing 28 complete games like he did the year prior, with 4 of those being shutouts. He also led the league in FIP, while striking out 269 in 314 innings. But he didn't win the Cy Young, as that was given to Tom Seaver. Just looking at the stats, you could give the nod to Gibson considering they started the same number of games, and Gibson had a better WAR, ERA, 61 more strikeouts, and he pitched 40.2 more innings than him. But considering how much voters put into team results and at the time pitching record, it's not really surprising. But what is surprising is that he didn't receive one first place vote. Regardless, the next year he put up an incredible year amidst new rule changes, as he won the Cy Young he probably should have won in 1969. And, funny enough, his numbers were better in 1969. For the first time in 5 years, he had an ERA over 3, while giving up 26 more earned runs and 20 less innings, and having a WAR 1.5 points lower. But that WAR and his FIP were the best in the league, and given the fact that his numbers were clearly better than Gaylord Perry, who finished second, then it's not too surprising. And though he never won another Cy Young, and only had one more All-Star season the rest of his career, he still finished strong aside from his final year when he was 40 years old. But what these years proved is that no matter the rule changes, Bob Gibson was one of the best to ever take the mound, and his 1968 season wasn't a fluke. Though offense was at an all-time low in 1968, no pitcher was close to what he put up that year, and statistically, few have ever gotten close since. When you add context in terms of league-wide offense, then a year like Pedro Martinez in 1999 is the most impressive. But in a year where pitching was at its best, and Bob Gibson was similar to players like Barry Bonds when offense was at an all-time high. Even when many hitters had the same advantages as Bonds, no one put up those numbers. And the same is true with the numerous advantages pitchers had in 1968, but were still unable to reach Gibby levels. And that stems from Gibson's insane competitiveness and intimidation. To see that level of competitiveness, all you have to do is look at the game logs from 1968 and see the numerous 9 innings pitched or more next to his name. He even told Trevor Rosenthal that he put so much effort into each pitch that he would pee blood after the games. That clearly sounds like more of a health problem, but is just a microcosm of his competitiveness. And more than that, he may have been the most intimidating pitcher of all time, and it was known by everyone. Hank Aaron told Dusty Baker in regards to him, "Don't dig in against Bob Gibson. He'll knock you down. He'd even knock down his own grandmother if she dared to challenge him. Don't stare at him, don't smile at him, don't talk to him. He doesn't like it." And another thing is, he was not afraid to throw at people, and part of that is that no one would dare charge the mound. Considering Bob Gibson was a Golden Glove boxer, I don't think many were too motivated. There was a psychological factor to Gibson that cannot be duplicated or taught, which led to him being one of the most dominant pitchers of all time. And though the offense was a league-wide problem in 1968, Bob Gibson was the poster boy for this. And just that season alone impacts the game today. Without an insane year put up by Gibson and a call for changes, we can only imagine what it would be like seeing Aroldis Chapman among others starting at a height just 5 inches higher, and a strike zone so big even Angel Hernandez could get a few calls right. Bob Gibson's 1968 goes down as a season so dominant that it literally changed the game. Similar to Wilt Chamberlain's dominance in college and the NBA, that new rules had to be put in place to stop him from sleeping with so many women. We'll probably never see a season like Gibson's in the MLB as a whole in 1968 again, and everyone from his teammates to opponents to toilet seats post-game were in awe of what they were witnessing.